we just crossed like a witch line. It has like a ward that when you cross it, like you're on their property. And right after that, one of our buddies is like, I see this like spiritual, being like literally stalking us for the rest of the trip there.
They're searching for something, right?
Yeah.
And they want something bigger than themselves.
I actually asked other people in town that were not connected to this whole thing. And he's like, they're all in their 80s to 100 plus, but they look like they're 40. And we've seen them since like the 30s. They're all in their 80s to 100 plus, and but they look like they're 40, and they show up once in a while in town, and you'll see them at night, and they'll come out and just kind of walk into town, do some things, disappear. And to set the record straight, I actually asked other people in town that were not connected to this whole thing, like, do you guys know these guys that come in? They come around all the time. They, do this blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, like they're super weird. Like you'll be walking next to them. They'll turn a corner and be gone. And we've seen them since like the 30s. It's like, and they look the same every year. And you're like, okay, so Eric's not totally crazy. Like there's these people, like other people know about these guys, and not to go like too crazy, but there was a lot of happenings with like, you guys
go crazy.
You guys know like the Gerber food.
Yeah.
Like they lived up near there. And when some Christians bought their house, they found all these altars in the back of the property, and they would tear down the altars. And then some people come back out and rebuild the altars. They had to hire a security team, and that family was a huge part of the like satanic group up in that area. And then they connected and joined in with Newaygo, the people that are kind of practicing together. And so it gotten deeper and more powerful and whatnot. And I'm not saying that all Gerber food's bad. I have no idea, but like they had some weird sacrificial stuff going on at their house. Like, and they were like relatively like, I think they were thought of as like upstanding Christian members, like supported churches and stuff in the town.
But they were much darker.
Yeah, it seemed like they, there was some stuff happening in that community. And again, so we kind of carry on, and I jokingly call Eric the gay vampire because he was most certainly flamboyant and practicing blood magic. And it's like, he was trying to live forever, and he was the secret keeper. He was the historian to keep the story alive. And he was talking about all the things he was trying to like keep alive. And he's telling, the different spirits and stuff that come to the house that he's an innkeeper for, and the historical, like why they're there. And he's like, yeah, people come all over to ghost hunt at this house, and they'll stay a night. And it's just, wild stuff like that. And so, in the midst of all this, I ask about the bookstore owner, and he's like, oh yeah, she practices magic. And I'm like, okay. And apparently her husband had passed away. So I'm like, did her husband pass away recently or had committed suicide? And he goes like, no, like he passed. And I'm like everyone knows he committed suicide. Like it wasn't like a secret. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just like, maybe you just don't like the word. Okay, cool. But like, he was like, no, like it wasn't suicide. He passed. And I'm like, weird. And he made this comment that was so eerie. He's like, did you notice how much more power she has now? And I'm like, that's a weird connection to her husband passing, not committing suicide. You know, like it was just in tandem. And he's like, yeah, and I'd never heard this phrase before, but he says she's a quantum witch. She can bend space and time. And that's why when you go into her bookstore, it's way bigger on the inside than the outside. And I'm like, no way.
Literally just experienced this.
I was like, I just like felt that, I'm like, this is weird, man. And he's like, yeah, she's a lot more powerful now. And I'm like, now, like, again, and I don't know her from the past. Like, I mean, I met her, an hour ago. It wasn't like he wasn't telling me now as in like, you met her before, he was like telling me like she personally had gotten more power recently. And it was in light of like her husband passing. And I'm like, okay. And you can connect your own dots there. And I've obviously connected mine. But so end up, at that point I let on a little too much that I knew about the human sacrifice of the infants in the town. He got pretty visibly like frustrated because he knew that I actually knew way more than I
You were
let
letting
on.
on.
I
Yeah.
was like asking him all these questions as like a tourist, and then he realized like I already knew, and I just baited him into telling me 2 hours of stories. And he was pretty upset, and so I left, and I actually went to the house church community back to Market 41 and shared all this stuff with them the next day. And so they're like corroborating, like, we've seen all these things, we know these people, like the same stories, like he's like, what he's telling you, we have like physical evidence of all of these things that we've seen as the church community here in Newaygo. And they're like, we're actively at war, but this is so helpful because we didn't know. You know what I mean? They're just like, we just know, like, we've heard the stories, like we've seen the influx of demonic, witchcraft. We've seen, this stuff pop up more, but we don't, we didn't know what to do with it. And so that was really cool. And then, so kind of, how summer goes, or maybe you don't, but summer for me is wild. I'm rarely home. And, so I go back a couple months later with, now four adult guys, and we're like, let's go back to Newaygo, like let's go. And,
Let's pay Eric a visit.
Yeah, exactly. So we get there and we go for a little walk. We had a, kind of a word to go down by the bridge. And so go down by the bridge, and, we're like walking through this kind of trail, and I see this like random little kid's shoe, and I'm like, it's weird, like, all right, whatever. And then I see like a little bit down the way, like another shoe, and then a loafer, and then a boot, and all up this hill down to the water. And I'm like, oh no, like we just crossed like a witch line, which is where they'll create a line of children's shoes, or people's shoes, doesn't have to be children, has like a ward that when you cross it, like you're on their property. And so that was like, it's a spiritual spell or whatever that kind of gives them, it's like a doorbell for witches, I guess. And so I'm like, oh dear. And right after that, one of our buddies is like, I see this like spiritual, being like literally stalking us for the rest of the trip there. And like, that's not good, and he described him as like a werewolf type spirit, where it's like, it was a normal man, but like in the spirit, he presented as like this like hairy wolf like person, but you could still tell he was a man. So that's why I called him a werewolf. But he had like,
not the werewolf you see on movies.
Correct.
Yeah, not Harry Potter.
Correct. But
I think movie number 3, Prisoner of Azkaban. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's more like you're basically uniting your spirit with an animalistic characteristic, and then taking some of their power, energy, strength. And it's very familiar, like in the Native American world with like skinwalkers and stuff like that.
Dumb question, but does this have anything to do with like, that's my spirit animal? But do some people take it a few steps further and like?
I think so, right? Or you think like to the berserkers, right? They would take on like the spirit of the bear, and they go into war and like survive crazy feats of things. But they do this like magical ritual, and they become these like incredible warriors, and they would take on the characteristics of that animal. Or when I was in like Uganda, there was a guy, he had kind of had some like, I don't know if they call it shape shifting ability, but he basically could fly, and he would like took on like some connection to the bats. And so he could like hear things all over town. And then if people would chase him, he would like literally like fly away. And so it's just like, and I'm like, that was in Africa and Uganda. So I'm like a little more like, I don't know the guy, I don't know, whatever. But they're like, yeah, everyone knows like he's super powerful, and you don't mess with him, and he can fly. And you're like, okay. Like, I don't know. I was like a 22-year-old, like, like I went on a solo trip to the jungle Gulu of, like Uganda, like by myself, and was like in a hut with like, and I'm the only like, I didn't bring a buddy,
Like so, there he is right now.
Yeah, it's just like, okay. So anyways, that's the way I describe it. And I know people get all into stuff like, no way, it's like crazy. And it's like, just look at the Bible. You see these people all throughout the Bible, right? Like there's these giant beings that had preternatural, supernatural power, and they were so fierce that, like the Israelites were like afraid and not wanting to, approach Canaan because of their giant like characteristics.
Yeah.
And you have Goliath and you have Og and you have like so many stories of these different giant figures. You have Nimrod, you have, Nebuchadnezzar
Rephaim.
and the Rephaim, and there's hundreds of these stories in the Bible, and we just like glance over them like, whatever. And like, even this is a super weird connection, but like Benaniah, I don't know if you guys know, is it Mark Batterson that wrote that book, like in a pit with a
Circle.
lion on the snowy day?
Oh yeah.
I think that's him, right? Well, it's like he was like, it said he killed a lion in a pit and he killed an Ariel, which means a lion man. And you're like, okay, that's weird. And then you go into other books, and that are not in the Bible, by the way. And I'm not saying they're true. I'm just saying, like, in other books, you can find this dude Benaniah who killed this part god, or he's a god, but he was a lion-like god. And it's like, well, that's weird,
Yeah.
like it's corroborated in other books that are like telling the other side of the story of like Benaniah's the bad dude, and it's like, wait a minute. I'm just like, you just like look over that stuff,
yeah.
you just read it and you're like, oh, he killed a lion man. Like, oh, it must have been a weird,
That's wild.
Weird thing. But I think it comes back to that, what was Satan's sin, right? He wanted to be like God. So God creates man in his image. And then you have these fallen angels creating things in their image, right? And that's what they were destroyed for, right? They were trying to corrupt humankind. They're trying to corrupt mankind, and they're introducing this mixture of things that are supposed to be mixed, right? And so you get the Nephilim, the giant races that come out of this mixture of the angelic and the human. And it's like, we see that all through the Bible. We see that all throughout history. And you look at Goliath, like, right? Like, that was Goliath. That's what he is. He's a descendant of this mixture of a human and a fallen angel. And it's like, I know it sounds weird to us as like modern day believers, but like, this is the same story that everyone's believed for like 6,000 years. We're just like the first people group to not.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you go to like everywhere throughout, even in America, you look at the hieroglyphic stuff that they find in like, the Grand Canyon, and it's like, there's giants, and you go to the Native Americans and they're like, oh yeah, these people, like,
everyone's got a tale.
Everyone tells the same stories, and we're just the first people like, nah.
We're the ones that dismiss it.
Yeah. It's like,
and we have all the access to any type of literature that you can possibly dream of. You know?
And I don't think it's required to believe this to be a Christian. I'm just saying, like, it's pretty arrogant to be like, we're the only ones in human history that got it right.
Right. I have someone who we had on the show, and he's like, there's a lot of stuff that people will glaze over in the Bible, but if you don't believe it, then just rip that section out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So werewolf, this guy, your friend sees someone, you're like, hey, he's kind of tracking us. And
so
at that point, what was going on? Were you kind of on edge? Were you,
yeah,
I would be curious, Holy Spirit, why, like when we're going into villages, like I feel like I can kind of kick into another gear, like the Holy Spirit gives you this courage.
Yeah. And that's 100%. Like, this is why I say, like, no wonder the American church men are so bored. Like, look at that parking lot spot. It's tough. Like, I got you, like, you're in the back on the sound, like you swipe up and like the smoke comes up, like, ooh, I got the power. Like,
we're gonna
look, it's like, whoa, wow.
Yeah, they're looking for more adventure. They're looking for more
and so
excitement.
But there's 100% that like almost rush of like, all right, boys, we're at war. Let's go. And it's not like I'm certain that can become addicting, and you can like, but I think anyone who's actually been to war realizes, like, you get that feeling, and then you realize, like, okay, I'm thankful for the times I'm not at war too.
Yeah.
But then when you are, you're like, Chad Wright, baller, right? He's like, I will be physically harder and mentally stronger than my opponent. And you just have that like in you as a man of like, no, I will be physically harder and mentally stronger and spiritually more secure and powerful because of our relationship with God than anything that comes against me and my family. And so that just kind of, even though in the moment, it's like, whoa, this is wild. It's like,
let's go.
That's what we were made for. It's the Joshua Caleb thing. And like, Yeah, they're giants. Yeah. What are we going to do about it? I'm not doing anything. I'm going to ask the Lord to do something about it, but I'm certainly not going to miss out on the promise for the sake of fear. And I think that's what we've taught people to do is like, I'll just be afraid and check out. And it's like, we might lose it all, but I'm not going to miss the promise because I'm afraid. I might miss it for something else, but it's not out of fear.
Yep.
So anywho, the dumb thing that I did that was kind of fun was like the guy, so the inn is for sale. And so I call Eric, right? And I'm like, hey, can we come check out the inn? And he's like, no, I'm not there. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, and he knew I was in town. You could just like, cause he's connected to this guy. And I'm like, they already all know that we're here. And so I like book a showing on showing time to go check out the house because I have my realtor license.
That's so great.
So like he like opens the door to this realtor and sees me and a couple of buddies, and he's like, like you know, like
dang
he's
it.
like, wait a minute, and I'm like, hey.
I thought you said you weren't here, Eric.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was kind of fun, and then you know, nothing crazy happened during that. Like you could tell, like it was kind of like anything that, I'll put it this way, he knew that we were at war, and he knew that we had power, and he knew that it was 3-1. You know, that it was that type of feeling where you could just see his like timidity and just like all of the expressiveness, all of the confidence that he'd had in our first meeting, like gone. And you could just tell he was on freak out mode of like, I just got to get through this. And he was doing his best, like, in the history of the house is, you know, like, bro, like you could just see the like, whatever. And so that we leave and you know, that night, one of our buddies who was there gets up to go to the bathroom, and he comes downstairs and he sees like an astral projection of Eric in our living room where we're staying at, like 45 minutes away. And he starts praying, and then the spirit, like Eric sees him, and the spirit just leaves, and we're like, Jesus, like this dude, like, you know, astral projected into our house to who knows what. You know?
Yeah, that's insane, dude.
Yeah, and then I called the church community because I'm like, hey guys, just so you know, like I think we like ruffled some bees nest feathers, you know. Like I don't like bees nest have feathers, but you get the point.
Ruffled some feathers.
Yeah.
We hit a hornet's nest of bees, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. And so they're like, yeah, this dude, and they describe this man now, physical man, not like a spiritual man, was following them around town the next day and like trying to intimidate them. And I'm like, can you describe the guy? And it wasn't Eric. And so my buddy, Steven, who saw this spirit, had like described the man who like showed up as a werewolf. And I'm like, she's like describing him like, Steven, was this what the werewolf looked like? And he's like, that's exactly who it is. And I'm like, so now this guy, he had been in the spirit kind of following us, but now physically was like trying to intimidate the believers, the church, and trying to like scare them to leave town. And was like stomping around their business, like,
that's insane,
you know, showing
dude.
up and like trying to intimidate them. And, you know,
so, astral projection. I mean, I don't know a ton.
Is that like where it looks like a normal person's there, or is it more like there's like a translucence? Or
it's definitely, it's more, you can tell it's not like a full body person, but it's also not like a hologram either. It's kind of somewhere between where you're like, yeah, it's
someone that can see in the spirit could see this, or do you think like
I think that both and like I'm sure that the guy that saw him was like the person in the whole trip who was like, this is all super weird. Not like one of the guys that are like, oh yeah, we've been listening to Brother Creatures forever, you know?
Yeah.
Like it was like the guy that was like, I'm just like a regular church pastor. Like, I don't really know what's going on here. Like,
so he saw this.
He saw it. This was actually kind of helpful. he was like, maybe I should be a little more like,
he's like, I guess there's something going on.
Yeah. And I think with the whole astral projection thing, it's like, we've seen this type of stuff throughout history. And again, it seems so weird to us, but it's like, we're all spiritual beings.
Right.
And people are accessing that on extreme levels. Like your average person's not going to go do that. But there's a reason here's a fun thought. Here's a reason that the US didn't punish the Nazi scientists, but took them all for ourselves. There's a reason that, this has happened in witchcraft. People pay big money for this stuff throughout history. Like there's a reason that, every story in the Luciferian world is like, if you listen to Anton LaVey's stories and stuff, it's like, he's like showing people's homes and like, it's just like, it's dark and it's demonic and it's something that shouldn't be glorified. But the flip of that is like, we have the ability to be in spirit with people and with the Lord, and we don't control it in the sense of like do a ritual to leave our body, but we have access to the heavenly realms to interact with God, to go before God,
right?
And I don't call that astral projection, but the system is the same. And so a lot of times what the enemy does is he takes the systems that God created for good and hijacks them and uses them for his own purposes, right? So a fun illustration of this, of music, of like, God says that when we praise, it builds a throne for his presence. That's in a weird way to say, we just built a portal for the presence of God in this room by praising. That's cool. Now, we don't use that language, of course.
Right.
But like in the spiritual, the mechanics are you can invite spiritual beings in through praise. You can invite them in through sacrifice. You can invite them in through these various things.
Yeah.
And you can invite them in on mountaintops. You can invite them in on, whatever. And so we see access points to spiritual all throughout the scriptures and throughout history, but we just get uncomfortable when we call it astral projection.
Yeah.
I'm like, I get that. It's weird, right? Like, that's not something I talk about very often, but the idea that our spirits are not like just fully attached to our flesh is consistent throughout scriptures.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that whatever language you put on it, we have a paradigm for some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Nathan, what do you think of the story you have? Gay vampire, werewolf. Dude, that's crazy. Like, this guy is super old, and there's other people. The bookshop that just is kind of unending, which is weird. Like, I've been to some places where you can feel a weird presence and oppression. I was talking about when I was in Australia, just some of the dark places, and it's weird to me. Like, how I'd love to get into that too. How did this lady, quantum witch, anyways, what do you think of that story, man?
Yeah, it's
astral
wild,
projection, like that's insane.
Yeah, no, I think it really is eye opening, because I think too, like as believers here, because I know a lot of people will come across different perspectives on the levels of spiritual warfare, right? Like what we're talking about here. It's like, it's being open to understand that, hey, okay, this does exist, but also too, just the fact that like, wow, okay, well, thank goodness we know a God who's above all of that, and dude, it's just like, part of me too is just like, it's super easy to fall into the trap of like fear. You're like, oh wow, like because really it's the fear of the unknown. You have to think about it. Because that's a lot of that we can't explain it. It's unexplainable. Okay, how can I approach this with confidence? Knowing, hey, Lord, you got my back in the midst of all of this. Like, so for me, I'm thinking that's like, oh wow, how can I prepare? Like for this, like kind of like you said, like the word you used earlier was like ill-equipped. Like, how would you like encourage those who are maybe you're just like weak in that muscle or just ignorant, or honestly, like how would you encourage those who are maybe in that camp of Christianity?
If I could, I'll make it super simple and then can go into a depth if needed. But I would just say everyone's called to be a warrior for Christ that follows Jesus, right? We were made as ambassadors, right? And so to me, I'm like, if I was going to train someone in like this stuff, I'd be like, start by praying over your kids every night, right? Like, just start by sharing the gospel. Like if you think about it, like, what is the armor of God? It's right. Even just think about like the breastplate of righteousness. So when I don't like go around and pray, like I pray the breastplate over you. I'm like, can I remind you of righteousness through Christ alone today? Like, can I remind you of the hope that we have in Christ Jesus as a helmet of salvation?
Yeah.
Can I share and teach you the truth, right? To gird up you in these things? Can I give you the sword of the Spirit and pray in the Spirit? Are you ready to share like what's keeping you from sharing Like, so it's like, it's an action item. And I think that like what I'm sharing right now is, I don't mean this to be like a unique thing, but it's like most people should not know this stuff in the church. This is way too far, right? But what everyone should be aware of is that they're in a spiritual battle and that there's an enemy that wants to kill, steal, and destroy. And that God's primary mission to advance his kingdom is to make disciples and to teach them to baptize them and to teach them to obey all that he's commanded. And so if we're going out and sharing that there's a true king, and we're inviting people into that family through repentance and baptism, and then we're teaching them to obey God. If you obey God, you don't have to worry about this very much.
Yeah.
And that's our mission as warriors, is to make disciples and to prepare ourselves for his coming, right? And in eschatology, understanding that he's coming back and understanding the commission of disciple making. This stuff that we're talking about right now is the high level demonic dark.
An outlier.
It's an outlier.
Yeah, not a story.
Yeah, it's 100% outlier.
Yeah,
and just like in military, you've got like probably 5 guys who actually know what's going on with the mission, but you've got 1 million people that are out in the field doing all the things that make it tick.
Yeah.
And so the way I think of it's like, I'm the weird dude in the room, in the little planning room. Like, all right, we think there's some crazy stuff happening when we head into this next battle, but the guys don't need to know that. Doesn't matter. And so I would say like most of the stuff is like, it's fun, it's frivolous, like it's real, it's powerful. But like what we really need is people who are making disciples, who are longing for his return, who are cleansing their house, you know, not necessarily like anointed with oil, but like, why do you have, you know, movies like that in your house? Why do you have, you know, why is the music that's always playing? Why are there, you know, like these invitations into darkness? And
Can be an entry point.
Yeah, like that's the kind of warfare.
The awareness. Yeah. That's
and it's beginning to pray, beginning to share of like, I talk to the students, I coach basketball. And so I got guys in the gym all the time. And it's like, I'm like, I just check in all the time. How's it going with righteousness? And I have different ways I ask that, but it's like, if the enemy's shooting these fiery darts of accusation and shame and fear, it's like, I want to be like strengthening that armor and that shield of faith, like every chance I get.
You said something yesterday that I thought was really cool. Like your ministry, you know, in the spiritual realm, even in the physical too, but like just thinking that you're planting your shield down in front of someone that's taking some arrows, you know, whether it's lust or weed or whatever, these arrows that the enemy's launching into them, and you're there to shield them, to protect them, and like, you know, obviously pull those out. And I love that imagery as well. That's
my job at war. I was just kind of sharing, like, I put the big shield up, and you can kind of like, as you're injured, you're on the battlefield, I find these injured people that have just been beaten down by life, whatever, and like you put a shield in front of them and you're like, how you doing, man? And you can watch like, I'm good. And it's like, right, you got 4 arrows sticking out of you, my guy, you know, like, and then that's where that lie comes in. This is where, like I was talking about earlier with the gifting of like, I know what those arrows are. Here's the things that I'm seeing. And then I ask, I can pull them out, but it's going to hurt. I got a little fiery sword that'll cauterize those wounds.
Yeah.
But it's going to hurt. Do you want me to do it or no? And then that's where the invitation is like, and then I leave. And most of the time, guys are like, nah. And I was telling you last night, like half my ministry now is just guys from the past that were like, dude, I wish I'd got that arrow.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like.
And those arrows could be thoughts of suicide. They could be addiction. They could whatever.
And
very, very real things that are.
Very practical. Like I still feel like I'm never good enough. I still struggle with pornography. I'm married now and I can't get free, or, you know, like whatever, like the anxiety and depression just keeps getting worse and spirals. And it's like, that's what the enemy wants, man. But it's like, they open that door to conversation. Like, I love you. Like, let's go. Yeah. It's, you know, we didn't fight 10 years ago, but why wait 10 more years?
Yeah.
You know, that's the invitation of like, let's just go do it. And that's where that war piece comes in. And we're all going to have, you know, I'm very upfront, aggressive, as you might imagine, in these conversations. And I'm like, we need the people that are just going to hug you. You know, we need the people that are just like, I love you, bro.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those guys.
No judgment.
I'm like, if you're around, let's go to war. Someone joked to it one time. They're like, your heart's like, some people have a heart like where it's like, you just like, they're like at a couch in a living room where it's like you just like feel so comfortable around them. You're like, man, and they're like, Ty, that's not you. They're like, you're a castle on the side of a mountain. People want to be around you when they're either at war and under attack or they're being trained as warriors. Otherwise, that's cool, but like you don't spend a lot of time in a castle on the side of a mountain unless you're under siege or you're getting ready to go on siege. And I'm like, and that's been my ministry in life of like, people come to me when they're at extremely heavy, hard points, or it's like they are in a heavy place and ready to go to war. Yeah. So, or vice versa. Right. Yeah. And so, and there's one more thing I just want to say with that too, that earlier question, like you said it really well. To be unaware that we're in a spiritual war is so dangerous, because it's like there's an enemy trying to destroy you and your family, and you're just like, I just want to think about golf.
Yeah.
Like that can't be the answer. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying you got to go out and, find a gay vampire, right? Like that's not the point, right? Yeah. Like the point is that like, I've had some awkward conversations with people. Like, I think what's weird is that I pray with your kid more than you do, and you're a pastor, and I don't like this. you know, like that's what's weird, right? And I want to give I do have another story. I don't know what timeline we're on here, but I have another wild
we're
story
good, man.
Just of like,
we'll do a full cut for. Don't worry about time. We're good. We'll just let it go wherever it goes.
Cool.
Yeah. 3 hours later, I'd be down.
Dude, I'm like, man, have
you seen that Sean Ryan episode where it went 12 hours?
No, but
dude, and people are like, I've got a 12-hour shift. Let's do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people like it. In a world where AI is really taking over a lot of different things, and
people crave authentic relationships.
Yeah, this is a premium. Like a full authentic conversation's a premium.
Yeah, that's so true. Dude, getting into the AI space would be a blast.
We gotta, part 2, dude.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That would open a can of worms that wouldn't close for quite some time.
Well, it's crazy because I've been reading some stories of people using AI, their chatbots, and building like a whole like person that they're talking to, and essentially speaking into like being the yes man. Oh, am I going through this? Of course you do that. Yeah, you do that. Then it leads, like I said, it's a slippery slope, or leads them to do some questionable things, or even potentially try to take their own life. I saw that one article too. But yeah, it's wild, man.
So, crazy stuff.
And what I don't think people are ready for is that the people that are creating AI at this point are not human. And I don't think people have a whole context for that. The fact that AI is writing itself and that it's evolving so quickly because it's writing itself, and 90% of code now has been written by itself, not by a human. And it's like, I think there's a creative law where you can't create something outside of what you are, right? Like above what you are. Like you can create something to augment.
Yeah.
Like a tractor can do way more than I ever could in the farm. But it still is like doing what I do, just on an extremely better level, right? It's not like something completely different. And so the fact that the AI is creating something that we can't create or understand, and you go to the stories of people that are creating, they're like, every time we look at it to see what it's doing, it stops. And then we look away and it starts working again. And it won't show us what it's doing to advance itself. And it's like, there's a spiritual power behind this thing that, Larry Fink calls it the AI God, right? Whoever has control of the AI God. It's like, I don't think you're going to control the AI God, my guy, but
yeah. Do you listen to Ninjas Are Butterflies?
Yeah.
They're good dudes. We had them on a couple months ago. Funny dudes. But they'll talk about AI, the data centers, and just the vast amount of resources that go into that.
Yeah.
The water that it takes just to cool it off. And
yeah,
man, like all that stuff is pretty gnarly. We definitely need to get into that.
Yeah.
And there's so many places we could take that.
We're living in the middle of the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible. The Entity is coming soon, right? So if you saw last, dude, it's like,
like the government disclosing different species, the 4 different species we were talking about last night, and there's some crazy stuff going on.
And we're just so close to this stuff. Like you look at what's happening in the Middle East right now, and it's like the Muslims are like ready to drop their Mahdi at any point. Right. And it's like, if you guys familiar with the whole, like the fact that the Mahdi lines up perfectly with the Antichrist. Have you guys ever seen that before? Like
I've seen that.
White horse, 7 years, set up, Israel, midway through destroy the treaty. You know, it's just like, you know, the nations in Ezekiel that come together before, you know, God comes on the scene, like, oh, they're all friends in Muslim right now and just just hung out with the Pope. And you're like, why is the Pope hanging out with Muslims currently? Why is the Pope having Muslims into the Vatican right now? Why are they talking about the different gods and demons in their own little neck of the woods? And like all this stuff is just aligning.
Things are getting weirder, dude.
Bro, it's so weird.
Super weird. And we're just taking it at face value.
Yeah.
Like if this happened pre-COVID and the government is disclosing UFOs and all these files and different species, we'd be freaking out.
Yeah.
Like who knows if like everything up from COVID, I mean, way back and also been psyops and whatnot, but like totally fabricated just for us. Like COVID has been pretty gnarly to just like let people go, you take it at face value. Like aliens, what's next month? What, you know?
Yeah. Next story, right?
Next story. Let's go. Okay. Take it where you want. I do have one that I think you should definitely share.
Cool.
You were at camp. I think you were at camp and you saw something in the water.
Oh yeah.
That's a cool one.
Yeah. So, I think camp ministry is just awesome in general. Like it's so transformative for people in both regards, because it's not because it's special. It's because it's the only time in life nowadays where you have 6 unfettered days where you're not distracted by all the things you have to do all the time. So it's like, it's spiritually power because there's the kingdoms are coming at each other, you know? And, I speak at camp and I'm like the one that breaks all the rules with camp, like speaking habits. Like, you know how usually people like come in the first night and they're like this nice, like they go like creation, fall, you know, redemption. Like you're kind of like, and then the last night you're like, okay, if you want to receive Jesus, we're going to play How He Loves and maybe some Taylor Swift. And then you're all going to get saved tonight when you raise your hand. And then we'll see you next year. You know, that's like how the camp lineup goes, at least in unfortunately too many of them. I start camp with the 2 kingdoms gospel. Some of us are enemies. Some of us are followers. And this week, I want you to know that if you're not following Jesus, you're an enemy of the cross. And our job here is to love you because God said to love our enemies. And we're going to serve you and support you all week, but you're an enemy of the cross. If you say you're a Christian, our job is to train you for the week to follow Jesus with your whole life. And that's like our first night message of like, you're in or you're out, all baby. Right, go to 2 your kingdoms. Let's go.
Then you launch into Eric's story and you're like, all right, go to bed.
Exactly. And we've just seen so many cool things, right? Like I was telling you last night, like we taught our counselors to pray over the kids every night. And it's like the most common testimony at camp is literally a kid saying, I had dreams every night of these demonic spirits and these horrific things. And I came to camp and my counselor prayed for me and he said there'd be no bad dreams. And I had no bad dreams this entire week. And I felt like I saw like a picture of an angel, or I saw, you know, like I slept peacefully for the first time in years. And they're like, I believed in the power of God from that day. And you're like, that's such a sick testimony. Just like, that's why I say like praying over your kids is a sick first spiritual warfare step.
Yeah.
Like just do it every night, every morning. Like I tell the guys, like, I don't have kids. And so, but the guys all know, like the Bible says in the morning when you rise, on your way to and from places, and when you eat meals and when you go to bed. And so I tell all the guys know if they're with me and we're like driving somewhere, I'm talking about Jesus with them. And if they're, you know, if we have like an overnighter event, like we get up, we do devotions, we go to bed, we talk about Jesus. Because the Bible says so. And I'm like, it's not like a hard command to follow. Yeah. You know, when you're with your, like, it doesn't mean you have to only talk about God every day. It's just like when you're on the road in the morning, at night, talk about God. That's what he says to do with your kids. And I'm like, I don't have kids. So I'm like, but if you're with me, then I treat you in that same regard of like, yeah, we're on the road. We're going to talk about Jesus. And they all know it. you know, it's like, and so one of the stories at camp that we had was, you know, you can set the spiritual stage at a place like that where it's like, and here we go to war.
Yeah. There's a
darkness. Like, it's just like kingdom of darkness or kingdom of light. Who's in, who's out? Let's rock. Well, one of those years, there's a girl who had given us quite a bit of a headache that week. And
there's always a couple people at camp.
and we have so much grace for them, but it's like, we're real. We're like, oh yeah, she was extremely difficult, and yet an extreme opportunity for us to love and to be refined as counselors and leaders. And so anyways, like
when you say difficult, are you saying like breaking the rules, like that kind of thing, or just pushing buttons for the sake of pushing buttons?
Yeah,
type of
like
thing, or just
trying to get kids to do bad stuff, trying to get kids to connect, like setting up, like, you know, like she was like went and told a couple of the boys who were struggling, like, you're gay and you should fall in love with like so and so at the camp, like stuff like that, like some dark stuff, and like would interrupt at different moments, and like just constantly make a scene. Like anytime things got like good spiritually, it was like, I've got to make a disruption, and then like maliciously trying to like get kids into sexual things, and like it was a mess. They were like 13, 12, 13.
Golly, dude.
Yeah. So anyway, so one night she goes to the bathroom, and the counselors are like, oh, what's taking her so long, you know, blah blah blah. And so they go into the bathroom. There's two of the counselors, and like they hear, like in the shower room, they hear her voice. So they like at this camp, like all the showers have their own private, like it's like just one stall with a door, right? So you can't, like, it's not a curtain, it's just a door, but it's a private stall. And so like they go to the door and they hear her talking, like, who's she talking to? And then this man's voice is like in there, and they're like,
it's a big no.
yeah, not a boy and a girl in a cabin, or
is that a camp counselor in there?
Well, that's the thing, and it's like it's a man. Like it's like it's not a, it's like a little one of the Pipsqueak boys that are around, you know.
Yeah.
It's just like there's a dude in there, and they're talking about like, how do we mess up camp and disrupt camp tomorrow? And the two lady counselors are like, what is happening? Like, come out now. And she's like, no. And they're like banging on the door, and like, we should go get someone and like unlock the door. Like, we got to figure out what's going on. Like, there's literally a boy and a girl in there, and the man is not a boy. This is not okay, whatever's happening. So then she walks out. She opens the door and walks out, and there's no one in there besides her. And she's like, they're like, what? Who are you talking to? And she's like, oh, that's my demon. And she's like, I channel him. And she's like, my mom's a witch and taught me how to channel the spirit. So I asked him to come and to talk tonight. And it's like, they're just like, they heard the voice. They're like, you know, we know. And it's just like, this stuff is happening in real time with our 13-year-olds, you know? And there's some awesome, like incredible, like other side stories too. I'll give one of those quickly for the fun of it. But we were light on counselors one year. And so I asked this pastor, he was like 50. His daughter was like 12 or 13. And he was like, I like to stick around, but I don't want to be in the cabins. Like, I just have some, like, I just want to be there in case my daughter needs me. But like, I'll serve in the kitchen or whatever, you know? And so like we get there and we're like, we don't have enough counselors. You're like, you're going to be in a cabin. And he's like, I can't, like, I don't want to do it. There's just no way, like, I can't do it. And I'm like, sorry, my guy, like, you gotta be. And I don't know the whole backstory, but he'd actually been the camp speaker there like 13 years ago. And like some stuff happened, not like where he was like inappropriate or anything, just like camp went a different direction. So he had some tension with just like being at camp and like
creative differences.
Yeah, exactly. There was some stuff, and I don't even know all the stuff, but it wasn't like he was disqualified from ministry or anything like that. I was just like, he hadn't been at camp in a while and was like, I don't not want to be in a cabin, and I'm not equipped for this, and my heart's just not ready, and I don't feel I could do it well. And you know, every lie in the book, right? So I'm sitting there, first kid starts to come, and I look down. I'll probably cry and tell the story because it's wild, but this first kid comes up, and it's like a mom and this like little 13-year-old boy, and like she walks up and she kind of like double takes when she sees him. And I'm like, oh crap. Like, she's like, who's this old dude? You know, like, cause all the other counselors are like, I was like old, I'm like 30. And like everyone else is like 18, you know? And it's just like, then there's one 50-year-old dude, and she like double takes. And she's like, are you Pastor so-and-so? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, do you remember me? And he's like, are you? And I see him, they both start crying. And she's like, she was pregnant at camp his last time he spoke there and was going to abort the baby. And then he talked her into saving the baby, keeping the baby, and led her to Jesus. And the boy that she was bringing to camp was the boy that she was going to abort had he not talked to her at camp that like 13 years ago. And you're just like, oh. And he was like, I'm supposed to be in a cabin, you know, like just, I mean, like, It's like the Lord does that stuff. And so it's like, that's spiritual, it's
Yeah.
like,
That's insane,
I don't know if
man.
an angel walked them up or,
Yeah.
or like what?
And he's like, I guess I'll stay in the cabin. Man,
Yeah,
that's crazy,
exactly.
man.
Just like, man, we were also so encouraged by it. Cause it's just like, what is the Lord doing here?
You think of
it's
that
like,
lady, like, what would her life be like without her son, right?
You just have no idea. And she's nervous to send her firstborn to camp. And she walks in, it's like, it's the dude who saved his life.
That's
just like, I trust this.
So powerful, man.
So that was just such a beautiful time of like, what do you do with that? Like, it's just, so yeah, we see the dark side, but it's like, I think that's what people miss is like, this is all happening in the context of Jesus is trying to reach people. And I think if we miss that, it's like we've missed the boat entirely in the midst of all the deception that we talked about, the AI, the spiritual reawakening. It's like, yeah, the enemy's awakening and showing his cards, but man, Jesus wants to show his cards and they're bigger, better, stronger.
Yep.
And we have to believe that he's coming back for a bride.
Yeah.
Ready, radiant, and longing for him.
Man.
And there's going to be some really hard and heavy times along the way, but he's present and with us. And it's like, we get that message to share with the world.
And who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
Right. Even the people like we've talked about, Eric, and some of these gnarlier stories, like they're searching for something, right?
Yeah.
And they want something bigger than themselves. They want something they can be a part of. And sadly, like it goes back all the way to like Canaanites, everyone is looking for something to praise, to worship. We're meant to worship, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of Muslims, right? They're looking to worship and their lifestyle matches up with their religion. It's one and the same. And at the end of the day, like people are looking for a creator to worship.
Yeah.
And I think everyone wishes it wasn't so hard, and there were so many, fallen angels and things you can get into. It'd be so nice if it was easy but it's not.
And I think that's the worthiness of things.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm in the sports business and so train athletes and stuff. And I'm like, you guys all have these dreams, but I know it's not worth it to you.
Yeah.
Because I watch the way you live your life and it's not worth it to you. I think that's what's the problem we've had with God is that we've made him as this like little dude who just wants to give you a hug. And it's like, when you see the worth, the treasure in the field, you give everything you have for him. And that's where you're talking about the Muslims. Like, man, they're like, I was willing to die for someone that didn't love me.
Right.
And now I find out that on top of the worthiness as a king, he loves me and he proved it by letting his son die on the cross that I might be brought into his family. That's worth dying
That's
for.
attractive to them.
And
you hear so many Muslims say, I'm tired of praying prayers that go unheard or unanswered.
Yeah.
And, fruits of the spirit, joy, love, peace. I mean, like, truly a lot of Muslims that we talk to, they're like, I've never had joy or peace. I don't know what love feels like. I think we were talking about some of those stories last night, some of the crazy ones, but man, I mean, it's so cool the work you do. Is there anything else you want to share? Like, any other stories or anything you want to go? I mean,
I'll give one more. It was just crazy because I think this is like, I'm just trying to think out how to say it the best, but long story short, I'd met this woman and I had shared with her like, hey, there's this like luring spirit on your property. Okay. And she's like,
luring spirit.
Like it was trying to lure someone or something into something. And that's all I really sensed in the spirit. I'm like, and then I told her, I'm like, it's Native American from like the Pacific Northwest. That's what I like told her. She's like, okay, you're weird. Like whatever. It's like, cool. So she, eventually she calls me a little bit, a couple months later and she's like, hey, like 4 people have seen this spirit in my house. She's like, I remember you said something about a spirit. And I'm like, yeah, like the luring spirit. And she's like, yeah. And she's like, I'm like, can you describe, like, what were they seeing? And she's like, it's so weird. Everyone described the exact same picture. And it was like a little girl, but they called it like a deer lady. So it was like a mix of a little girl and a deer. It had like a little like whatever thing on, like a little hood thing on, and had like the face of a deer, but looked like a little girl. And so I just, I'm like on Google, like, all right, deer lady Native American luring demon, you know, like as one does. My poor Google search.
and then Google, CIA is like definitely flagging that.
Yeah.
NIA's in there.
Yeah. Anyways, the thing that pops up is this like this dear lady spirit that would lure unfaithful men into the woods and kill them. And I'm like, well, that's kind of serious. Like, you shouldn't really want that, you know, in your home, blah, blah, blah. And so I'll kind of truncate this a little bit, but basically, you can tell she's like visibly upset, and her boys live in the basement, and not live, but the rooms are in the basement by where the same room where all of these people saw the spirit. And they're not like a spiritual family. Like, even when I first told her, like they're Christian-ish, but you know, like not like a spiritual, not into that stuff. And like the people that saw it are not like, it was like they're her aunt, and you know, not like a like, all right, like what's in that room? Like, is there like a totem pole or anything? And she's like, yeah, my grandma gave me a totem pole like a year and a half ago or something. And I'm like, okay, like, so I'm like, go grab it, or she goes and grabs it. Was in Florida at the time, so I wasn't able to be there at all. I'm just like on the phone with her, FaceTiming.
Yeah.
And so come to find out, her grandma gave her this totem pole from Alaska right before like a year and a half ago when she moved back. And a week later, she had caught her husband at the time watching like pornography and like chatting and like basically cheating on her to some level or measure. And that day when he went to work, he was walking around at work on a construction site, and suddenly 4 straps just immediately got completely cut, and the cement slab killed him. And it's like, so there's this luring spirit that drags unfaithful men into the woods to kill them. And 4 people have seen it at your house. I discerned it, and it happened. Your husband passed away after cheating a week after you got this totem pole in your house. Like, what? So we start like, I'm like, we need to like burn that thing now, and then we'll wrestle with like the ramifications of this later. And so I had our boys like go burn this thing. So they have like a little fire, and like it won't burn. It's like the other wood's like burning down. They're like, this stick is not burning. And so like they put it in like lighter fluid, and it's like the other wood's burning and this thing's not burning. They like go outside and put it, like dip it in a gas can, put it back in the fire. Like, gas burns, the thing doesn't burn. And they like, we've been trying for like 45 minutes to burn this thing. Like, what do we do? And I'm like, did you try praying yet? And they're like, no. I'm like, just pray. And so we start praying, and the thing bursts into ash the second we start like praying in the name of Jesus against this thing.
That's insane, dude.
And we're just all kind of like,
yeah, it's good to get rid of that thing.
Yeah, like,
I probably don't want that around.
What do we do from here? Like, do you go like, what? Like, I have a totem pole that like, I mean, like, she lost her husband. Like, it, what, you know what I mean? Not that
so crazy,
like,
dude.
This family's like broken because their husband died, and then you're like, was there like a part of this that was
what do you
spiritual?
think? I mean, like, it's easy to make your own dots, but like, what do you think is happening in the spiritual realm?
Yeah, in my opinion, like I personally am like, as hard as it is to say, that type of stuff again, like there's a reason people pay witch doctors, right? There's a reason people go to shamans. There's a reason
stuff happens, right?
Yeah. And I remember there was a girl in our youth group. She had like these crazy concussions all the time, and she went to YWAM, and she's at YWAM in Papua New Guinea, and she meets this little like former witch doctor lady. She's super sweet, and she's like an 80-year-old woman, like, and she was teaching all of the like content for the week in Papua New Guinea. And the woman like sees this girl, and she's like, do you have head problems? And she's like, I haven't been able to play sports all through high school, and I've been in constant concussions. Had to like wear a helmet in high school. After like 5th grade, I've had like these crazy concussion head issues since 5th grade. And the woman's like, were you in India? And she's like, no. And they're like, she's like, my mom and sister went to India, and when I was in 5th grade. And they're like, did they bring you something home? And the woman, she's like, yeah, they brought home these little like rings and trinket things. And she's like, did the head injury start right after that? And she's like, yeah, it was the next week that I like got kicked in the head by a horse. And just like, so I was going on, you know what I mean? And the woman's like, you have like a, you know, like a head injury demon spirit that was attached, like it was a curse on you. Like it wasn't like a demon itself, but it was like a curse that came, my bad, a curse that came on you from this trinket they brought home. And they prayed, and like all her head symptoms, injuries went away. Like 7 or 8 years of everyday concussion challenges, like basically like think about like the recovery of a concussion for 10 years, you know, or 7 years or whatever it was, like, and gone. And this little witch doctor was like, she's now a Christian missionary, sorry, was like, oh yeah, that's like a, you know, an Indian curse they put on people,
which
and
is
their
very,
objects.
very common over there.
Yeah.
We had some people at E3. One of them went to I forget, Argentina or something. Some kids threw a curse on her.
Yeah.
In the streets, and she like literally had it, like someone couldn't talk for a little bit until they cast out demons in the name of Jesus, and then they come home. She got so bedridden and developed MS, and it was so bad. My mom went and prayed with her and like identified the exact time, you know, this happened, and they traced it back to that trip, to those curses that were thrown on them. And after she was delivered, you know, like she could get up and walk and was fine.
Yeah.
And this was someone I knew personally.
Yeah.
And that stuff's real, man. I mean, that stuff is gnarly. You see that a little bit more on the eastern part of the world, some of the curses and stuff, but like it happens here too.
Yeah. And that's where I think it's like, I don't want to go out and outright say like, I know that, you know, that thing happened because of X, but it's like at some point during COVID, I started trying to coin this term that like people would always, you know, call us like conspiracy theorists. And I'm like, well, you're just a coincidence theorist. You think everything's just a coincidence. Like, you know, like that Bill Gates just invested in this company and told you that he was going to do this and then made billions of dollars on you being afraid of this like vaccine that doesn't work, that somehow doesn't protect you from anything. And you need me to be vaccinated so you can be safe. Like, that's a coincidence theorist. I'm like, so I'm like offending, like, I'm just like, you're just a coincidence theorist, aren't you? And they're like,
that's great.
So I jest in some of that, but it's like, at some point it's like, guys, like, not like you said, there's not a demon under every corner, but at some point, like the spiritual realm is real. We can influence it and interact with it. And we need to be at least open and aware that there's stuff going on in the spiritual places around us that we're engaging in.
Yeah.
And to just put your head in the sand, it's like, you don't know it. You know, like, it's like, man, at least look for the bomb. Or at least if someone tells you, hey, there's an IED in the road, you don't just go prancing through it. You know, it's like, I feel like that way with like yoga and the Enneagram. I'm like, you don't have to like even believe it wholly, but like, don't just run in and embrace it. Like,
the doors are opening, or
like at least think about it. Like at least read a book on like the goal of yoga or how they got the Enneagram.
Yeah.
You know,
no,
like,
it's wise.
Like,
we need to be shrewd. I mean, we need to be smart, and it is insane how, like you said, people can just put their head in the sand. Any message for people that, like, you know, maybe at this point they're like, man, I feel like I should start, you know, somewhere. I need to start, you know, not like, you know, like you're saying, there's not a demon under every rock, but I should be prepared. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Like you said, pray for your family. That's good stuff.
Yeah, I think, pray for your family. I think if you want to engage in a war, right, like you have to prepare your body, soul, spirit, right? And that the body, soul, spirit prep to me is like, it begins with doing the foundational things, and everyone goes to boot camp, right? What's boot camp? Learn to read your Bible, learn to pray, learn to suffer, be a disciple, right? Like actually have someone disciple you and actually disciple someone else. I would say 99% of what I know about the Bible, other than from reading the word itself, is from actually doing ministry and going out and trying to disciple someone, because you learn so much more by walking through people with things.
Yeah.
And the Lord is going to open those doors for you as you're obedient. And so I don't think it's like a, God, give me a glimpse into the spiritual realm. Like you can ask for that. He might, and you might regret it. You know, not to go on another story, but one time I asked the Lord, like,
Another story.
I was like, Lord, like, I was at a youth conference and I'm like, the Lord has shown me like a heart for one of the kids, one of the people in the room or whatever. And I'm like, Lord, can I just like see what you see? Dumb prayer, bro. I was like crushed. I fell to the floor because I felt like everywhere, like I could see everyone's like deepest, darkest, most emotional, like the thing, how we carry stuff for people sometimes, like you carry stuff for your kids, you carry stuff for people in your life. I could feel the carrying of every 3,000 person in the room. And everywhere I looked, the Lord was just like, I feel every emotion and heaviness there. I'm like, God, like stop.
Super
like,
overwhelming.
Just
crazy overwhelming.
I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm not going to ask a dumb question again. I mean, I will, but like, like, just show me people you want me to talk to.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do that that was just insane. But I think the Lord will open doors for you as you say yes to the little things. And the principle here is like, you've been entrusted with a little and you want more. It's like, no, be faithful with a little. And it's like, if you're not even comfortable sharing the gospel with a neighbor yet and praying with your kids and reading the Bible out loud with people, like jumping into spiritual war, it's like, you're just going to get killed.
Yeah.
Like probably not physically, but it's going to be so overwhelming. And that's why like I do this, even on this podcast, I'm thinking of some of my friends that'll be listening to this and some of the people in my town that'll be like, and I'm like, yeah, this is crazy. But we have to start the foundation of like 20,000 hours of discipleship, 100 hours of cool, crazy stories.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're not unwilling to do the 20,000 hours of, discipleship, I don't recommend this for anybody.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you're going to learn the principles you need to know for war in your home, in being a disciple, in praying, in studying the word, and teaching it to others. And all of a sudden that stuff is going to become like, it's super real, but it comes because you're engaged in the spiritual places the correct way, in praise, in worship, under one sacrifice forever. We've been made perfect and holy. Like, you don't need to think about other sacrifices if you don't even know that you've been made holy by one sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like start with righteousness. And I'll just give this tidbit I think it's really helpful. Hebrews 5:11-14, it says, if you're unfamiliar with the teaching of righteousness, you are but a babe. So if you can't teach righteousness, the Bible calls you an infant. I don't care how many years you've been in ministry. I don't care how many demonic experiences or angelic experiences you have. If you can't and aren't teaching righteousness, the Bible calls you an infant in the faith. And then it says, and I'd like to go into these elementary principles, right? Repentance from dead works, faith, baptism, laying of hands, resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. So I tell you, if you can't teach those elementary doctrines, I don't know why you're messing around with all this other stuff. And I was a youth pastor for 5 years, and we just had one rule. Every teaching has to be from righteousness, repentance, faith, baptism, laying of hands, resurrection of the dead, eternal judgment. That's all you can teach on. We did that for 5 years. Because it's like when you graduate elementary, right? It's like you should know multiplication, division, reading, writing stuff. It's like, if you want to go to battle and war and you don't know the elementary teachings and you're not able to teach the elementary things, it's like, I don't recommend war.
Yeah.
Like
sit this one out. No.
Yeah. Like,
but it's good for you to say like, man, like maybe you're not wanting to go to extreme measures, but there's some proper steps you can take.
Yeah. But then if you have been to those, if you're like, I can teach those things, like I do teach those things. I'm actively discipling people and I'm, desiring to get more into the spiritual side of ministry. I would really just take that consideration of that, 2 Corinthians 10:3-5, like what are the strongholds in my mind and what are the strongholds in the minds of the people around me that are coming against the knowledge of God, and how can I destroy them? Mm. And I think that's just like it's a command to believers. It's a commission by God. It's like, you've been given this ministry of reconciliation, and it's defined by a weapon of righteousness to destroy the lies of the enemy people's minds. And so I think that's just the easiest in. And then if the Lord blesses you or whatever we want to call it. Most people don't think what I've experienced as a blessing, but those that might, I do. But I think the Lord can do that and open those doors. But I think it starts with like, I'm just willing to love on the people that I'm near and just ask God, what are the strongholds in their mind that come against the knowledge of God? And how can I fight it with righteousness and the truth of Christ? Yeah. And I think the Lord's going to empower that more than he will a prayer of like, make me see in the spirit.
Yeah, like, man, well said. Well, tell the listeners where they can find more out about you. If you want to plug anything, go for it.
Yeah, I thought about this. I probably should have something to plug, but I don't really. You can follow me on Instagram at tycanfly13. I also have a SoundCloud, which I have random teachings and incredible worship sets. Nice, they've been recorded over the years with kind of our own songs and stuff. And the teachings on SoundCloud are unedited, unscripted. And if you can picture my life with this as like, I'm happy with a B+. I'm like, content out of the park. Production, F.
Okay.
And so good luck with that.
Nice.
But I probably should have wrote a book or something cool like that and put it online to buy.
Yeah, maybe someday. But dude, thank you. This has been awesome. We got to do round 2 for sure. I mean, this to me has been one of my favorite conversations. So incredible.
Yeah.
Man,
AI, prophecy, and eschatology.
Man, God bless you. All the work you're doing. It's super fun to have you on. Got to do it again. Well, Ty, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. Truly, it's been fun. Thank you for flying down here, your time, going out, doing some barbecue. We shut the place down last night. Literally, there were people like the staff was closing shop,
and we're like, use the restroom yet? Because we're
shutting down. And I was like, we can keep going for a couple hours. So, man, thank you. We're going to have to do round 2, maybe some live stuff too. That'd be incredible. So, man, God bless you and your ministry. And we'll see you next time, man.
That sounds awesome.